Today we're going to take a look at some of the new for 2025 Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and today we picked up a large shipment of plants for our Proven Winners Signature Garden. Most of these are new varieties for 2025, so we're excited to be able to get them out in our trial gardens so that next year we can showcase them and show them to you as they're out in the garden. And if you come to visit, you can walk through our living catalog. That is why we love to put new plants out in our gardens, because it's something where we can walk outside, show you the plants so you can see what they really look like in person and in an actual garden setting. So there's several plants here, and today we're going to take a look at maybe 5 or 6 of my favorite of the new for 2025 introductions. I've seen them out in the trial gardens at Proven Winners, and there's just certain plants that just really stood out to me, and I am excited to show you those plants as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at these new plant varieties for 2025. So it is the end of the season, and some of these plants are starting to look a little tired. So we are going to, at the end of the video, show you some trimming on some of the plants that are looking a little bit less than perfect right now. So that way we can show you what you can do in your gardens if your plants aren't looking very happy. When I was out in the trial gardens and I saw this Whip It Good arborvitae, I'm like, I've got to have that plant. It just adds so much interest and so much texture into the garden. So Whip It Good is an evergreen. It's hardy in zones 3 to 7, and it likes to be grown in full sun to part shade locations. The texture of this plant is truly unique and different, unlike any of the other arborvitaes we've ever carried before. It just checks that fun and whimsy box if you're looking to add something just totally different into the garden. In the trial gardens, they had this paired with some hydrangeas, the panicle hydrangeas, and I love that kind of stacked, layered look that they had. So Whip It Good definitely is going to be a welcome addition here out in the trials at Garden Crossings. Durvilla Jet Black was also really cool to see out in the gardens. So I talk a lot about the Durvilla in our trial gardens here at Garden Crossings because they add such a unique look, and there's 4 or 5 different varieties as far as different colors, and we like to kind of mix and match them all together in the garden just to let the colors play off of each other. So there's Kodiak Red, Kodiak Fresh, Kodiak Orange, and Kodiak Black. All of those I have more of that greenish foliage with red or orange or black tips on it. So this new Kodiak Jet Black is a totally different look to the Durvilla. So with this jet black or dark black foliage, this is going to look amazing out in the gardens because it's going to contrast so well with all the various greens and or flower colors that you may have in the garden. So Durvilla Jet Black is hardy in zones 3 to 8, and it gets 3 to 4 foot tall and 3 to 4 foot wide. It is deer resistant, which that's what I love about this plant, especially for so many of you who are asking me for deer resistant varieties. This definitely is a good choice. Also, it's a native. So for those of you who are kind of going more towards the native selections, Durvilla is a great native shrub. Also, it makes a great cut flower or cut stem. You can cut these and use them to create indoor arrangements. They like to be grown in full sun to part shade locations. Although a lot of the Durvilla that we do grow them in more shadier locations. The only thing I can say is if you do plant the Durvilla in a shadier location, you may not get the intensity or the richness of this foliage. It may appear a little bit lighter. So I don't know, this is exciting to be able to bring that dark foliage to areas of the garden that typically would be reserved for more your chartreuse or your green foliages. Also, Durvilla is a great plant for the pollinators. It gets beautiful, just tiny little yellow flowers. Although the flowers aren't super significant, when they are out and blooming, the honeybees find them. So it's a great plant for attracting pollinators as well. So Durvilla Jet Black is going to be a cool new foliage addition to the 2025 Color Choice Shrub lineup. So the joke when we go to Spring Meadow Nursery and learn about all of these various new shrub varieties is whenever a new genera or family of shrubs is introduced, it's always like, hey Heidi and Rod, here's a new one for you. because to be honest, the only shrubs that we are familiar with are the Proven Winner Color Choice shrubs. When we got started, we more knew our perennials and our annuals and are very comfortable with perennials and annuals, but we didn't know a whole lot about shrubs. So everything that we've learned about shrubs, honestly, has come from Spring Meadow Nursery. So it's always fun when they add these new introductions in of plant families that we've never heard of before. And this is the case here with this Lakotha. This is Paisley Pup. Paisley Pup is a really cool variegated shrub. We're going to take a closer look here at the foliage on it. Paisley Pup is a native from Maine to Georgia, and it's one of the most graceful broadleaf evergreens for planting in partial shade. That's right, partial shade. So if you're looking for one of those plants that doesn't take a whole lot of sun, this is definitely the plant. This new selection is awesome because it shows a kaleidoscope of ever-changing color. You'll see shades of green and pink and cream and white and bronze and yellow. There's just so many different colors that this plant will be putting out through its foliage. It also has fragrant white bell-shaped flowers from April to June. It's hardy in zones 5 to 8, and it's a native perennial as well. Also, if you are looking for something, again, that's deer resistant, Paisley Pup is also deer resistant. So what I really like about this is that it's evergreen and it's deer resistant with a lot of foliage color. Everybody's ears perk up when they hear a new hydrangea's been introduced. And this year there's been several new introductions for 2025 in the hydrangea family. This one here is Powerball, and we're going to pop some pictures up on the screen so you can see the uniqueness of the flowers of the hydrangea Powerball. So this is a panicle hydrangea, and panicle hydrangeas bloom off of the new growth. The thing that's unique and different here about Powerball is the shape of its flowers. So the Powerball flowers are more of a spherical shape or a circular shape, much like some of the Macrophylla hydrangeas. Usually when you have a panicle hydrangea, the flowers are cone shaped. So Powerball definitely has a different and unique flower form. The flowers start off a refreshing green and they lighten up over the summer before taking on deep magenta hues. That's the thing I like about most panicle hydrangeas, is how they transition from white to magenta, especially here in Michigan where we have some of the cooler nights. Hydrangea Powerball is hardy in zones 3 to 8 and can get 3 to 6 foot tall and 3 to 6 foot wide. The flowers are excellent for cutting, so if you like to dry your hydrangea blooms in the fall for your winter porch pots, Powerball would be excellent for that. So really excited to see how Powerball stands up in the weather with its extra sturdy stems, its circular blooms, and just beautiful fall color. Butterfly bush have a very iconic look in the garden. Butterfly bush can get 6 to 8 foot tall, or they can be super short, only standing 2 foot tall. Usually butterfly bush will start blooming here in West Michigan midsummer and bloom until we get our first good hard frost. Well, here we have a butterfly bush called Mop Top, and it is vastly different than any butterfly bush I have ever seen before. Mop Top is actually a early summer blooming butterfly bush. So early summer, little lavender flowers kind of drape over or mop over on this plant. It's hardy in zones 4 to 8 and gets 3 to 5 foot tall and 3 to 5 foot wide. It attracts those early season butterflies and hummingbirds and pollinators. It's deer resistant. It just adds a unique flower form to the early summer garden. Very unexpected when you see that it is a butterfly bush that is blooming early on. The foliage too is very different than typical butterfly bush foliage. With its thin strappy leaves, even when the plant is not in flower, as we're seeing here, it has some interesting texture that it adds to the garden. The tops of the leaves are green and the undersides are kind of silvery, kind of giving a very dimensional look here in the garden. You can see too the spent blooms really don't seem too big a deal here on the plant. You can trim them off if you want, or just leave them on. I don't think that they look too bad being left behind. But Mop Top is something different, something exciting, and something new in the butterfly bush family. When you hear the words hydrangea, there's things that come to mind. Hydrangea Annabelle, Hydrangea Incredible, Both of those are fairly iconic hydrangeas. Annabelle has been around for forever, and a lot of people, when they're referring to an arborescent hydrangea, they call them all Annabelles. Incredible was introduced several years ago with its extra large flowers and really has, in our opinion, taken over the market for Annabelles. So people that have been asking for the Annabelles, we've been recommending the Incredibles to them because we just know they're a better plant, sturdier stems, larger flowers, and a much nicer landscape presence. Well, new this year is a new Incredible, and this is called Incredible Stormproof. Incredible Stormproof, the name is giving you maybe a few little clues as to why this might be better. Incredible Stormproof has extra strong and sturdy stems. So after a heavy rain, after a heavy windstorm, this plant is going to stay sturdy, it's going to stay strong, and these flowers are going to stay upright on this plant. So Stormproof is definitely kind of one of those bomb-proof plants that give it the weather and it's going to just look at you and say, look at me. I am just as beautiful as before the rains came. Stormproof is hardy in zones 3 to 8, and it gets 3.5 to 4 foot tall and 3.5 to 4 foot wide. It likes to be planted in full sun to part shade locations. It is a native hydrangea, being part of the arborescent family. Typically, this will start blooming around July here in Michigan and bloom for a good 4 to 6 weeks. It starts off as kind of a soft chartreusey green, and as the flowers open, they open to this beautiful white that you're seeing here. Stormproof has a little bit smaller flower than the Incredible hydrangea, but the sheer mass of the amount of flowers that this plant has is just, it's incredible in its own right. So maybe not as big of flowers, but lots of them, and held atop super sturdy stems, so that even, again, when you get those hard rains and those big winds, this plant is going to keep all of its flowers up on top, which is where you want them to be. So we are excited for Incredible Stormproof. We can't wait to get it out in our landscape and give it a trial for ourselves here. I've seen it out in the gardens at Spring Meadow, and every time I've seen it, it's looking just as fantastic as it's looking here in this container today. So make sure you put Incredible Stormproof on your list of must-haves for 2025. This here is a prunus called Stay Classy. You can see how it kind of has some little winger outer branches. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just trim this branch back. That way, as this puts on new growth, it's going to give it just a nicer habit opposed to having shorter stems and then a winger outer. If we can get it all trimmed so that it looks similar as it puts on new growth, it's going to keep the formation of this plant a little bit better. So I'm going to just go ahead and just nip it right there, and that kind of is giving it a little bit better shape. Now when this starts to put on new growth for next season, it's going to have a more nicer rounded type habit. We have a couple more of these, so I'll give you a couple more examples. Now these have recently been planted before they were given to us, so there's not a lot of height on these plants. So I'm going to just go ahead and nip this one just a little bit here and a little bit here, just to kind of get it, a little bit more compact, bulk it up a little bit. So, when we're trimming shrubs here at Garden Crossings, we trim frequently because it's more important for us that when we are shipping you out a plant, that it's something that's nice, tight, and has a good shape, opposed to a plant that has 3 or 4 stems. They're nice and tall with a flower on the end. That doesn't look good, and over time it's not going to look good, because we know once we send our plants out to you, the chances of you actually trimming them is not great. So the more trims we can get on our plants here, we know the more successful you'll be with them in your garden. So let's go ahead and take a look at a hydrangea. Hydrangea Top Fun is going to be what we're looking at next. So let's move on down the road. This here is Hydrangea Top Fun. It is a mountain hydrangea, and you can see it's looking very scraggly and floppy, and it does not have a very good habit to it right now. If we plant this in the garden, this is going to look floppy next year as well. I do not want a flappy hydrangea in my garden. I want something that's nice and full and has a good habit. Now, mountain hydrangeas do bloom off of the old and the new growth. So by my trimming this plant right now here in the fall, there is a very good chance I am going to sacrifice my first round of blooms. But obviously I don't want this look next year. So I am okay, especially in these first years of doing the trimming and sacrificing that first bloom, so that I can have a better shaped plant later on in the season, and I'll have nicer flowers, you know, later on in the summer off of the new growth. So what am I going to do with this? I'm going to do a light trim on it. What I call a light trim would be just taking the flowers off. I'm not paying too much attention to what I'm doing here. I'm just taking those tips off. That would be what I'd call a light trim. Now I'm going to do a heavy trim on this because again, it's still floppy and I don't want it to be floppy. But let's take a look at something as long as we're trimming off those flower buds. We're going to look here at the plant and I'm going to show you where next year's flowers are forming. So you see that there? That is potentially next year's flowers down here as well. So this is why we typically do not recommend that you trim your mountain or big leaf hydrangeas in the fall, is because you would be trimming off your potential earlier blooms in the summer. So this is what you're looking for. That's your flowers for next year. But again, remember I said it's more important to me that I have a nicely shaped plant than to have those early flowers. So I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit more aggressive on trimming. And I'm going to go quite aggressive. And I'm not even paying attention to where I'm trimming either. When we trim, we have a certain look, a certain length of the stem that we want. And that's what I'm going after here. So you can see this one here, flopper. We don't want the flopper. So we're going to lop off the flopper. So now we have a pretty dense plant. You don't see any wingers or any floppers on there. It's nice and firm, nice and tight. So as it puts on its new growth next spring, it's going to have a much nicer habit than had I left those long winging branches on it. So this is definitely what I want to plant in my garden. I have a couple more I'm going to show you too, just so that you can take another look at what I'm doing. Another example, a lot of floppy going on. In this one, as I look in closer to the pot, it's even floppy like way in here. So these branches here are quite floppy. So with this one, I'm going to go even extra aggressive on. And I'm going to trim this one really short. I know some of you are cringing right now at the thought of what I'm doing, but I am going to trim this one really short. So actually, you know what? This seems a little long compared to the others. Let's trim it off. So that was a really aggressive, hard trim. And we do this at times with our hydrangeas. If they're floppy, they're going to get a good hard trim because they need to behave. If I'm going to plant something in my garden, it has to be well behaved. And this is one way I can get this plant to be well behaved. So that is the Top Fun hydrangea. Let's see what else we can trim up. This here is the Oh So Easy Red Stripe Rose. This is a new rose for 2025. It has a pretty nice shape and a pretty nice habit, but we're going to get ready to kind of put this one to sleep for the fall, winter. If we decide to go out in the landscape with it, my trimming it isn't going to affect us planting it outside. Or if we're going to put it to sleep in the greenhouse, again, my trimming it now isn't going to affect, you know, the fact that it's just trim. So we're going to go ahead. It's a rose. I don't have my gloves, so I'm going to be smart and not touch it so much. But I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of some of these long branches. So getting rid of some of those wingers just kind of nicely shaped up this plant into more of a round mounded habit. So now it's ready to get planted outside, or like I mentioned, we can put it to sleep here in the greenhouse. I'm having fun with the scissors. Let's see what else we can find. So butterfly bush mop top is a spring blooming shrub. Typically, spring blooming shrubs you do not trim in the fall. You would trim them after they're done flowering in the spring. And because mop top is looking fairly decent, it's a big plant, I do want to enjoy the flowers of this next spring because I've not really seen it like really good in person. So I am not going to trim this one right now. Now after it's done flowering, I would go in and just get it shaped up nicely. Get rid of some of the wispy branches on here. But this one here, because it's a spring bloomer, we're going to forgo the trimming this fall and wait until spring. And the last one we'll be trimming today is the Durvilla Jet Black. And this one is a pretty nice shaped plant as it stands right now. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim it back a little bit so that way next year as it puts on new growth, it'll bulk it up a little bit and just make for a fuller plant. So this one we're going to do what I would like to call kind of that 1/3 trim, taking the top 1/3 off the plant. So there, by doing that, it just kind of gave it a little bit nicer shape, got some of the branches off. Every cut is going to realistically produce branching, which will be a fuller plant for next spring. If you have any questions or comments on the new plants for 2025, they will be going online on January 1st, 2025. So right now, this is more for information. You will be able to start purchasing them on January 1st. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. If you're new to our channel, we welcome you to subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.